So, did you know that your GPUs can actually accelerate your photo editing performance? Did you know that you're most likely also buying the wrong GPU? Don't worry, I've got actually good news, because if you haven't bought yourself a GPU, this will be the ultimate guide to GPUs for photo editing. Because I've spent my last 3 months benchmarking all of them, and this is just a fraction of those GPUs that we've tested. And now we can actually dive deeper into what are all these things that matter for photo editing and what don't. Hey, what you doing? I'm putting this up there. No, I'm putting it up there. It's the best, so it goes on the top. Listen, buddy, I just tested it, and this is the best. This is the FSP Mega TI, and it's as good as PSUs get, up to 1650 watts, 80 plus titanium rating, and much more. Well, I've got this FSP Vita GM 850 watt. Sure, it only goes up to 1000 watts on these models, but it's sold as 80 plus gold tier product while achieving platinum level efficiency. I'd say a lot better value for money. Plus, it's received multiple international media awards. Media awards. This has media awards for breakfast. It's fully modular. It has two 12-volt power connectors for those who want to run multiple high-end GPUs, and ATX 3.1, PCIe 5.1 certifications, ensuring the highest quality connections. Well, ATX 3.1 and PCIe 5.1 and fully modular are also standard over here. And it's a much smaller footprint and comes also in white color, plus more affordable. Yeah, but the Mega TI is still better. No, I think this is better. Wanna check out mine in the description below? If you're building the best of the best PC, you have to go with the FSP Mega TI. The Vita GM has strong performance with great value, which is the smart pick though. But which one would you choose? Firstly, I want to say huge thanks to AMD, who provided these latest 9000 Radeon GPUs, one of them being over here. This is the Nitro one from Sapphire. And if you don't know what these GPUs are and what they look like, I actually went a little bit deeper about these GPUs in the video editing video, so go check that video out. By the way, if you are a creator and you would like to get access to all of our internal database about GPU guides, GPU, all of this data that you'll see in a minute, then I highly recommend signing up for our newsletter so you would get the relevant information directly into your inbox, making sure that you don't miss any hardware info or news that actually makes your workflow better. If you want to pick up any of these GPUs, I'm going to leave them linked in the description below as well, and you can find any other relevant information for you down there. We're going to take a look at Photoshop and Lightroom Classic first, and I've got some new benchmarks for Lightroom Classic that you haven't seen on the channel before, and that's why it's taken 3 months, because I've had to re-benchmark everything again. Here's the thing. How Pugetbench for Lightroom Classic and Photoshop work is one of the best actual benchmarks that I have seen out there. So if you don't know how this works, Pugetbench has made this program that runs and tests all of these things in a very, very similar fashion like you would do on your actual workflow. You know, when you're using select sky or select subject, or when you're scrolling through the actual photos and figuring out what to do with them and which ones do you want to keep on Lightroom Classic, or when you're selecting subjects or select a tool, or all sorts of things that you actually do in your workflow, Pugetbench has created special tests for these. So as much as you see just the score in here, they are actually real world tests. They have spent years building this type of test that would mimic the actual workflow, and that's why I absolutely love them. Because if I just showed you two things side by side and I might say, this feels faster, actually, that might not be the case, because now we can subjectively look at all of these GPUs and see which one is better at photo editing. So some people say, oh, Pugetbench is just a synthetic benchmark. Well, not really. I would say that this is the most accurate way of measuring your creative workflow performance. Now, very importantly, what you need to know is not everything is GPU accelerated in your Photoshop and Lightroom Classic workflows, or Affinity Photo, or whatever other photo editing software you're using. There's only certain things that are GPU accelerated in your workflow. So if you just think, I'll buy a better, more expensive GPU, that's probably not the right way to go about it. For example, Adobe Generative Fill that you might be using on Photoshop, that actually does not use any of your hardware in your PC whatsoever. So if you're waiting for it and you're thinking your PC is slow, it's probably because your internet speed is slow, because it sends that to the cloud and then comes back to you. The same with Lightroom Classic versus Lightroom. One of them, you might be actually editing photos on the cloud and your internet speed is the bottleneck rather than your hardware. So make sure you're using the right software the right way. My test bench setup, what am I using? I am using Intel 12900K, and very importantly, I haven't got the iGPU enabled. We're using 64 gigabytes of DDR4 3600 megahertz RAM. We're using Samsung 980 Pro SSD for our SSD, 360mm AIO from Arctic, the Freezer 2, the previous version, and 1200 watt Be Quiet power supply. If you want to check any of those out, I'm going to leave the link in the description below. I've got some other quick questions that we'll get to in a minute, but first I want to look at these results in here. So what you're seeing right over here is Adobe Photoshop scores. And on the top here, you can see that the Sapphire RX 9070 Pure, this guy there, is the best GPU for Photoshop that I have tested, which is absolutely insane. In fact, looking at all of the AMD GPUs in here, look at them. AMD is absolutely leading the chart in here. Then we've got an RTX 5060, which comes right over there. And then actually Intel GPUs. The RTX B580 and B50 come right on the bottom there, which are only about 5 to 7% slower in the overall scores. Now, if you're looking at the best, most expensive GPU that you thought would usually be for creators, look at that over here, NVIDIA RTX 5090, about 8% slower than the top of the chart, which is very fascinating and interesting. Now, another thing to mention in this is that the actual top to bottom, so first till the last one in here, if you're looking at that, there's only about 15% difference between all of this, which means that the best and the worst GPU in Adobe Photoshop, there's not that much of a difference. In fact, I would argue that you might not even be able to tell the difference. But regardless, that might be a huge bottleneck in your workflow, which I'll talk about in a minute, even though you don't see this in this score here, because there are other aspects of your workflow that we need to look at in a minute. Now, if you're looking at the overall scores in here to actually see the chart, then you can see that the top part right over there are a little bit better than this rest of the section kind of over here. And then you've got one lower section just right down there. But this, I would say, is the top part of the GPUs. And there's not that big of a difference. Between the RX 9070 or AI Pro R9700, there's not that big of a difference. But there might be a difference in your workflow. And that might be a huge thing. But what we see in here really is that there is not that big of a difference. I also left you some different Photoshop versions attached right over there. So you can actually check out that even the version difference doesn't make that big of a difference. So as you look at the B50 or 9070 XT, there is not that big of a difference. Or add the 5060 in there, the difference doesn't really matter which software you're really using. But regardless, I would highly recommend using the latest software because most likely you're going to get the best performance. Now, moving on to Lightroom Classic, what you see over here is, again, standard and extended scores now. So this is a little bit different. Everything that is green here is extended, marked as EXD. And everything that is not green, so this here, and then this here, they are standard, marked as STD. That sounds bad, doesn't it? Yeah, so standard STD. But this bit right over here, where the percentages are calculated, this is actually calculated against the extended. So that's why you might actually see this part here, and you're thinking, wait a second, how is the second place 103%? It's because, as you can see, the 9070 XT is actually better at extended scores than the 5070 Ti. And that's why you see that there is a little bit of a difference. You'll see the graph in a minute and then it explains that there as well. But what you have here is an AI score on the very end. So any of the AI tasks that you might be doing for, select the sky, AI object selection, AI masks and things like that, that is that score there. And what we've seen firstly in the AI score is that there is probably the biggest difference in between the GPUs. So if we look at the Intel one here that really performs very, very well, 91 compared to the 5070 Ti, which is 118 between these two. So that's a huge difference. And if you look at the Arc B50 here, again, a lot slower than anything else out there. And then the lower NVIDIA GPUs in here, you can see this row, 79%, whereas all the other scores don't change as much. Then what you can see here is working with Nikon RAW, Sony RAW, Panasonic RAW, or Canon RAW, there is not that big of a difference what you might expect. Obviously the 9700 XT here, if you look at this score here and then the best 5070 Ti, then yeah, there is a difference, but not as much as you might think. Between the top and the worst GPU, we actually have only 11% difference. So that difference is even smaller than in Adobe Photoshop, which is fascinating. And here we're looking at the extended scores. So looking at the charts, so here where we can see actually everything lined up and where you can see that the standard overall scores on the blue is actually just going down, just very mildly down. But if you look at the actual red, then the red ones are massively different. So as you can see, the B580 that is right over here, the reds, there's a huge difference between the red just over there. And again, if you look at this guy here, this is RTX 5080, you can see that the red score on extended is very high, performing probably third best overall, somewhere over there. So not everything is exactly lined up there. But what this tells us really is that there is not that big of a difference in Lightroom Classic that you might actually think, and I'll get to that in a minute. One very interesting thing that I noticed is that the actual Intel Arc A series just crashed. Whether I tried the A770, A580, and then anything I put there, it just crashed. When I went to the B series, B580 or B50, both of them, as you can see there on the benchmark, Intel driver is still probably not the best for Lightroom Classic. Regardless, looking at the newer GPUs, like the B580 is a very good value option there. You might be looking at this point and thinking, wait a second, do I actually need a GPU for Lightroom Classic or Photoshop? And here's the thing, not necessarily. I would say that even if you have an iGPU and you just build something and you don't have a dedicated GPU, it's completely fine. And don't worry about it, you can still use Photoshop or Lightroom Classic and it's gonna be completely fine. Now, you do get some kind of performance increase when you use dedicated GPUs, and GPUs are more and more supported in photo editing applications. A few years ago, I said that having anything for your photo editing rig doesn't really matter, but actually now it does matter a little bit, but not as much as you think. There is one thing that you need to keep in mind, which is VRAM capacity. So how much do you need? How much VRAM do you need? Because some of the lower end cards like the B580, which is here, has good amount of VRAM compared to NVIDIA that offers still 8 GB on the lower end, which is not very good. And AMD that offers kind of 16 GB on all of them, which is absolutely fantastic as well. So the way I would put it is that if you've got less than 8 GB, then that is very good for basic tasks. If you've got a 4K monitor and you're doing more complex than just like writing something on the screen in Photoshop, then I would say having 8 GB of more is necessary. If you've got maybe 8K panoramas or something like that that you're doing in Lightroom Classic, if you're working with larger canvas photos, like 50 megapixel photos, 100 megapixel photos and so on, having large amount of VRAM, especially if you've got a high resolution display and multiple of them, you might start to eat into your VRAM capacity, which means that having 12, 16 GB and plus is very, very good. And that might be one of the biggest bottlenecks why you might need to upgrade your GPU, because you don't have enough VRAM. So having the likes of 5060, that looks like very nice on the top there, but only 8 GB of VRAM, that might not be enough for you. And going with the B580 is a better option, or perhaps going even AMD. And that's why the AMD Radeon Pro that has 32 GB of VRAM might be the best option for Photoshop whatsoever across the board. And we can see that in Lightroom Classic is not particularly performed very well, but that's only about 5 to 7% slower than the best card, but has 32 gigabytes of VRAM, exactly the same as a 5090 that is only a little bit better right over there and more than double the price. And if we go back to Photoshop, we can see that the actual Pro card there is right on the top. This guy here changes blows between that. So actually, AMD's got a very interesting thing going here. I would say for photo editing, AMD's got an edge. That Radeon Pro R 9700 with 32 gigabytes of VRAM, blower style, yes, it's a bit loud, but I argue that you're probably not gonna see it ramp up that much in your photo editing whatsoever, so it's a good card in there. But on the budget end, I think a B580, as you can see, performs very well. Now, there might be some other questions that you have, so let's answer those. 10-bit display. I've seen some people say in the comments, well, does it support 10-bit? Actually, that's quite an old question, and that is not a problem these days. Any of the NVIDIA cards or Intel cards or AMD cards, they support 10-bit, and even the last few generations support 10-bit. Unless you're running something very old from 2019 or before, you might get into the issue and you might want to go with a Pro card on NVIDIA, but since then, you're absolutely fine. Affinity Photo, maybe you're not using these softwares. Now, I did a little bit of digging into that one as well, and what I can see is that Affinity Photo may be a little bit more new in terms of GPU usage and uses GPU or utilizes GPU a little bit better. Regardless, I would say that the difference in there is not really as big as you might think, and you'd see similar performance, what I've shown you just here between Lightroom Classic and Photoshop. So expect very similar performance in Affinity Photo. That's what I've seen online. So finally, what does actually make the biggest difference in photo editing in your workflow? The thing is, it's not actually GPU. It's CPU and RAM. So if you are doing purely photo editing, I would highly recommend putting most of your budget into CPU and RAM. And that's where you'd see the biggest difference. And another question you might have is, what about Apple? Is Apple any good for photo editing? In fact, I would say Apple is absolutely fantastic at photo editing. For what I've tested, the Apple Silicon performs incredibly well, especially Lightroom Classic. At the price point and just performance, it's absolutely insane. If you want to buy any of these GPUs, check them out in the video description below. I've got some awesome information for creators. As you know, we benchmark hundreds of GPUs and CPUs and other tech on the channel for creators. If you scan this QR code over here, you get access to our internal data and benchmark database. There's also a link in the video description below if you want to check that out. And we'll also be sending you my 3 tips for optimizing your PC that I also do for video editing. So if you're interested in that, scan that QR code. If you have any other questions or requests, check out Minect in the video description below. I'll always get back to my Minect messages 100% and very fast. So if you want that, link in the description below. If you'd like to stay up to date with the tech and information that's important for creators, highly recommend signing up to our mailing list, which you can scan through this QR code or find the link in the description below as well. And this is for people who don't have time to always search for the information, but just want the right information to land directly into their email box. And I am not a big fan of spamming inbox because I'm one of you guys. So I've just created a way how you can get access to the best information relevant for you. And hey, if you've reached this far, then YouTube thinks that this is one of the videos that you'll like next. And actually hitting that like button, it makes a difference. Subscribe with bell to not miss any of the future uploads. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much, guys, for watching. Bye-bye.